we're in the heartland of America, and it feels like the third world.
I would think that like if anything else happened to this city right now, everything would just fall apart. And yet we're all still here. Like uh, capitalism took a huge dive back in March, and yet we're all still here. Like our lives have been completely changed, but we're more or less doing the same things. Like, what more would it take for us to stop going home and watching Netflix? I don't know. Like, you would have thought that we would have been past that point. If all this shit were happening before the internet, even, like, fuck, I don't, like, I feel like more things would be on fire than they already are. But, like, there are too many comforts, maybe, to even end all of this.
For me, it started at Standing Rock and being there and being able to stand with my people against the United States government and their tactics to keep bullying people of color and native peoples, especially with these pipeline intrusions going over traditional lands, but also reservation lands. And being there, I saw the deployment of the U.S. military tactics, guns, drones, and all kinds of other things that I've never seen before, which really lit a fire under me to be more proactive. Seeing it firsthand changes your perceptions of things, and being at Standing Rock really allowed a lot to be internalized in a way that I couldn't see before. Of course, you can read books on history and native histories and things like that, but there's things that they don't teach you. And I'll tell you this, like Standing Rock, things that happen there, they're not going to teach you that. Those aren't going to be in the books. Media will cover some of it, but there's a lot of things there that went down that really changed me for who I am, for the better, I think, and for my people.
This just format isn't working. And I'm like, well, you're assuming that we're the problem in this whole thing. And it's just, the fact of the matter is, like, the reason why we are here to this point is because every other outlet seems to provide little to no results. And even the results that we do get are apparently, as history has showed, are so fragile that they can just be rolled right back. So, like, you go from, like, hey, I'm having a problem, like, hey, let me express to you, tactfully, maybe meet you where you are in order to get you to understand and empathize where I'm at, to like yelling maybe, and then banging your head on the wall, and like it's not us, doing it wrong. It's really gaslighting, just over and over and over again, in different mediums, in different settings.
So the KKK puppet was my idea. As an Iranian-born immigrant, I've always felt like I exist in a no man's land, just like constantly insufficient for any single identity and really not having any place whose story or history was my own. just because I've lived between 3 different continents and languages my life. And despite my family's obsession with assimilating to white American culture, there is this history, of us being profiled and harassed by men with badges ever since we came here 2 decades ago. When Trump announced that he was coming, Tulsa was already dealing with 2 pretty other recent events. One involved the police brutalizing 2 black teenagers allegedly for jaywalking, even though the street that they were on didn't even have sidewalks. And the second thing was the comments made by TPD Major Travis Yates, who got on an interview and said that the police are shooting black people 24% less than they probably ought to be. It was like, look, these are active white supremacists with a badge and a gun and the power to kill on behalf of the state. So we ended up putting that quote by Yates on the front and the back of the KKK puppet. It really is a reflection of our own lived experiences. And it was even a reflection of like the anger and the fear that Tulsa felt, that we all felt with Trump's announcement that he and like 1 million of his supporters supposedly, were descending on Tulsa. As a group, we intentionally decided to not really film the puppets as they were being made. Other than a couple photos that were taken on disposable cameras, we didn't really document the fabrication process. And this was because we were very concerned about retaliation or surveillance.
It honestly felt like MAGA people and white supremacists were going to come and trash the whole place, and Trump was just inviting them to come wreck our city. Paper mache is just paper mache. Everyone's done it. It was exactly to a T like what you did in elementary school. Usually art just has to survive making it to the pedestal, but these puppets had to be a lot sturdier.
I grew up in Tulsa. My thought was, why? Why on Juneteenth? Things were getting pretty crazy. They brought a lot of people to town. I went to get some straps for Gazelle to meet her at the art studio downtown. We were all just sitting out under the tree out in front of the Greenwood Cultural Center. I'm walking down Archer Street. This car pulls up right next to me. This guy pops out with zip ties and tells me to just get in. They'd been following me since I dropped off the straps. They didn't identify themselves as anything. They were plainclothes officers with earpieces. I didn't resist because they were armed. I mean, the guy had a pistol. I hadn't done anything wrong. They all had guns. Everybody in the vehicle had guns. And not one time did they identify themselves. They just said, get in. So they take me to this abandoned warehouse where they think that I'm going to be scared, but it's actually just a place that I've been to like a bunch of times before. They forcibly pulled down my mask, which I was wearing because of COVID. None of them were wearing masks at all. There was cameras inside the vehicle all over the place, aiming everywhere. It felt like I was in a reality TV show. They started asking me weird questions to let me know like how closely they had been watching me. They got very aggressive and kept asking things like very aggressively, but I really didn't know any things that they were asking me. They asked me about the building, the art building, a bunch of different times. Asked me what's going on in there, and that's when things got a little spicier. They mentioned I had a backpack for the first time, didn't have a backpack the second time. They asked why I was in all black. I was wearing this t-shirt actually that says demanding a just Tulsa. They kept asking me about Antifa. I didn't know anything about them. I didn't even know what Antifa stood for at the time. I was just telling them no, I don't know anything about them. I don't know what they stand for. They kept asking me if I wanted to humiliate the president, if I was trying to humiliate him, what things I could do to hurt or humiliate him. They tried to get my phone. They grabbed it from me, tried to get into it. They didn't have the passcode. They tried to hold it up to my face and let my face ID unlock. They asked me if I was planning to plant a bomb. C4. They kept asking me if I knew about C4, if I knew about different bomb techniques. Literally, I've never worked with a bomb before, knew nothing about it, but they just kept asking me these like deep questions about bombs. The whole time, the guy had these zip ties on his lap as a gesture of like, this is where things will go if you don't cooperate. They kept asking me what my plans were against the president. They asked me a bunch of times how I felt about the president. They pressured me about whether I was Democrat or Republican. They asked me questions about my family, my parents, my grandparents. They had my whole file pulled up. They knew my parents' names, where I went to college, loans I had out. I just kept asking them for a lawyer, that I wanted to talk to a lawyer. They told me no every single time. Well, about the fifth or sixth time I asked, they said, there's not a lawyer in the world that can help you right now. And at that point, I was just really scared of disappearing into a black hole somewhere. I've heard of Guantanamo and all that stuff. I felt sick to my stomach when I heard about what was going on in Portland, just because I'd been through that situation and I saw the rubber bullets being fired out there, and how it was such a much more intense situation, and I just felt really sick to my stomach that I know for a fact that it happened to somebody else out there. To me, it seemed like they were scared of the art and how many people would agree with it. All the video that was taken while I was in the car, I'm afraid that they'll retaliate if I, ever speak up. They kind of gave you that impression that they knew exactly who you were, where you lived, and that they'd come for you if you ever did something they didn't like again.
Things that were top 10 in: terrible water quality, air quality, human trafficking, missing and murdered Indigenous peoples and women, girls, diabetes, heart disease, cardiac failure, suicide. Yeah, those are just off the top of my head. Oh, incarceration rates. My name is Alexandra Scott. I live in Norman, Oklahoma. I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm 26 years old. I was born on Easter. Fun fact. I'm a former teacher. I'm a former Norman City Councilor. I'm currently running for State Senate, District 15, against an incumbent. I defeated an incumbent in 2018 on my birthday, actually. So I was elected on my 24th birthday as the youngest city councilor in Norman history. We had a budget meeting on June 2nd, and the budget was postponed until the following week so that we could come up with a solution, because there was a large gathering at the city hall, people demanding, to defund the police. So there was a 27 to 28% increase proposed, and so I went and asked the finance director what an 8% decrease in the police budget would look like, and he said about $4.5 million. So the proposed cuts that I made, were to cut $4.5 million from the salaries and benefits portion of the police budget, which would have effectively cut the police force in half in Norman. It was not popular with the police or their supporters, and it did not pass. But it did result in a reduction of just under $1 million to their fiscal year 2021 budget. And this was like pre-primary election for me, knowing like this was going to be unpopular, but it was an absolutely necessary thing to do. So I got like a lot of phone calls from people, like just random people. I answered my phone, I had all these voicemails, and people were saying, I hope you don't get robbed on the way to your car, you fucking bitch, or I hope, nothing happens to you where you need the police, because if something happens and you need to call them, like nobody's going to come help you. The doxing happened basically then and after the Trump rally, because when I was arrested at the Trump rally, they took my address and everything, and then they put it online, and I had my address. And so then the people, when they were spreading it like on Facebook, and it ended up on like conservative media sites, it got worse kind of in Norman. So the following weekend was when my neighbor was raped. And I got a text from my across the street neighbor at like 1:30 in the morning, and I wasn't at my home that night. So my across the street neighbor texted me and asked if I was okay, and I was like, yeah, I'm not even at home. And then I texted my duplex neighbor, and she said that she was raped and told me kind of how they got in and what they said. And I was like on the road whenever she told me, and I just started crying, feeling like very guilty about what happened. And my car broke down, on the highway when I was going home. Considering my neighbor has lived there for 8 years and I've lived there now since February, and had all these events happen, that's, yeah, I would say. And, you know, the words that she's shared with me that the assailant said to her, he said, maybe next time you'll learn your lesson. So I know that the police department basically investigated themselves about them doxing me and found that the officers did nothing wrong. So then I spoke to them, told them anything I know, and they were like, do you have any suspects? And I said, this cop, this cop, this cop, and this cop, basically. Start there and let me know. But maybe, you know, with 5 of the Norman Police Department officers having left the department after this happened, maybe they relocated, because that is something that is known to happen. Whenever they get caught doing something, they're able to relocate. I would say that that incident, that isolated incident, is a representation of the systemic state violence and police brutality. And that was really like when it like kind of like settled in about how dangerous the conditions are, not only for me, but for my comrades. And then 3 days later was my primary election, which I won. I won by 61%. It's like I went to jail and like the police were doxing me. They were saying terrible things about me. And we defunded the police and I still won my primary. So, I mean, there's hope. Like, if like I can win my primary after all of that, like, there's hope for sure.
Is that a pig?